welcome George Owen.
Glad to be here.
Tell me a little bit about how you got started in music and how your involvement up through the Monarchs.
Well, I got started in music at my old house when I was about 7, and my second cousin lived about 3 doors away. He was about 4 or 5 years older than me, and he was a pretty good piano player. And I used to go up and sit on his front porch and listen to him practice. And finally, after a few years of that, my mother says, well, I was 9 by then. She said, "You want to take lessons?" I said, "Sure." So she signed me up with this woman named, what was her name? Evelyn Fouth. She was an old German woman, had graduated, a classical pianist. She'd graduated from Cincinnati Conservatory. She was very strict and very German. And I studied with her for 9 years. But anyway, since we didn't have a piano, my old aunt up the 2 doors down would let me come in after our son practiced, and I'd get to play on her piano and this went on for 6 or 8 months until my mother and dad saw how I was enjoying it, and so they bought me an old upright piano and put it in the basement and told me I could practice down there to my heart's content because it wouldn't bother them upstairs. So that was the beginning of things, and I played on that old upright for 3 or 4 years. I was treated to a much nicer piano when I was about 13 or 14. Mother and Dad got a Baldwin Spinet and put it in the living room so that I could, I guess by then I was tolerable to listen to, so they didn't mind listening to me practice. And that's kind of when I discovered that girls were attracted to musicians. You're 14 years old, and I went to my mother and I said, there's some girls in school that got a singing group, and they need a piano player. She says, "Well, you're not going to impress them with Schubert and Chopin. You better learn a little rock and roll." So anyhow, I became the accompanist for this group of 4 classmates. They were really the popular girls in school. They were all very pretty, and all the guys were jealous because they had to come to my house to practice because I had the piano. And let's see, by the time I was 15, maybe, I guess I was pushing 16, I was invited to play in a little band, and I got $10 a night. So, I could play Friday and Saturday nights with this little band, and I made $20. And, back then, most all of my buddies were working for 85 cents or $1 an hour, so I was coming out way ahead of them. So, anyhow, that little band was called Don Miller and the Corduroys, Chordor, Roys. But I needed something to play on because I couldn't drag the spinet out of the living room. And I ran across a guy that had one of the very first Wurlitzer electric pianos. And he wanted $200 for it. Well, I didn't have $200, but my dad made me a loan, which I paid off at $5 or $6 a week. So I owned that electric piano, and that's the same one that Ray Charles did What I Say on. So, there weren't very many of those around at all. And this was about 1960 or 61. Now, when that little band, we quit playing there eventually. We moved on to something else, and that band kind of fell apart, and all the people went different directions. And I got a job at Vine Record Stores at night. I was the night manager of Vine Records at Broadway and Preston. And so I worked, it was an after-school job because I hadn't graduated from Durrett yet. And one of the people that came in fairly regularly was John St. Clair of the Sultans. And he would come in and supposedly buy a couple of records, because that's the way, they worked up a song, is they'd listen to the record and simply imitate it. So anyway, John St. Clair and I got to be buddies, and I thought, boy, here's a star. This is one of the Sultans, and I'm like 16, 17 years old. And so one night he said, we've got a rhythm guitar player who's going off to school in Lexington, and we're thinking of replacing him with a piano player. Do you know anybody that might want to do that? And I said, well, I might. And there were a couple of other guys there to audition, but I was the only one that had a piano. So by exclusion of the other two or three, I became the Sultan's piano player. And I was, I guess that was November of '61. I was a senior at Durrett, and because I graduated '62 with Leon Middleton, and Tommy Jolly was right behind me in '63. At any rate, I got the play the piano for the mighty Sultans, who were pretty hot at that stage of the game. Leon Middleton, who had been my high school, in fact, he and I double dated on our senior prom. Leon and I had been friends since about the 7th grade and both played in the high school band, and Leon was our drum major, as a matter of fact. Leon had played with a group called the Aztecs with Bill Haswell and Sherry Edwards, Sherry Chenault back then. And Leon called me up and said, would you be interested in changing from the Sultans to the Monarchs? Well, this was like 1963, and they had just recorded Look Homeward Angel, and of course I wasn't on it because they had already recorded it. But anyhow, that really lifted them up to a real prominence, especially in Louisville, or in the area all around Louisville in Indiana. But the main thing that was the attraction was the Sultans paid me $18 a night. The Monarchs were going to pay me $20. So, and the Monarchs was a bit more of a democracy in the way they ran things at that time. It was like they had started out as a garage band with Dusty and Mike. Mike was the drummer and lead singer, and of course that all changed. But for the first couple of years of the Monarchs, they were kind of, experimenting with each other in the garage, or which in this case was Gibson's basement. So by '63, they were getting formed up pretty well, and they had Alan and Martin and were managing their careers, or getting them jobs and getting them recording dates and so forth, and that just sounded like the place to be. And by then, I'm in college. And so I said, sure. And he said, well, come on over and play with us Saturday night. We're playing a dance at Durrett High School. I'm going, wow, that's my school. I'm going to know everybody there. So when they announced that I was the new piano player at my old school, it was, it was like Frankie Avalon had just come home, Anyway, that was...
So how long were you with the Monarchs?
Oh, gee. Well, I started with them in late '63, and I played with them until, well, I had 2 years out because I got drafted in '67. When I came home in '69, we all kind of got back together again at the impetus of a newspaper article that was Dave McGinney from the Courier-Journal was doing an article sort of based on that movie where the theme was, where were you in '62? So anyway, we all got together just for a party one night, and from there the Monarchs decided, well, that was kind of fun. We still sound pretty good. Everybody's back home from where they were. Military, out-of-town jobs. Dusty had been at University of Pennsylvania University of Pennsylvania for his master's degree. And So anyhow, we thought, well, let's go out and play at this dance that Louis was throwing out at St. Polycarp. And I said, well, that's great, except, and everybody else had their own instruments and their own amps. I didn't have that piano anymore. It's long gone. The band actually decided to take a band job and buy me a nice piano, which they did.
Where were some of the places that you would play with the Monarchs that you remember?
Well, back in the 70s or before that.
Oh, whatever you remember.
Well, I mean, playing in the 60s was really kind of interesting. That was the Lebanon era. We played Lebanon, Kentucky, usually once a month. And there were two major clubs down there, the Golden Horseshoe, which was owned by one family, and then there was the Club 68, which was owned by a guy who was the mayor of Lebanon, Mr. George. Lebanon was kind of a wide open city. I can recall nights where parents would drop their kids off the front door because they weren't old enough to drive, and they could come into this place and party with the best of them. Those were always fun jobs, even though the trip down and trip back were pretty difficult because that was before the roads were improved between here and there. The era of 63 to 65 was really sort of our heyday in the Monarchs because the record was getting airplay in different parts of the country, and we were getting calls for making an appearance in Cincinnati. We went to Cincinnati and played. We went to Parkersburg, West Virginia, and played. Played in Indianapolis. There were certain limitations as to how far we would or could go because you got 9 guys in the band, and a lot of them had regular day jobs. They couldn't just take off and go to California. But anyhow, we were just really, really working. And I can remember the times that we had 5 band jobs in one weekend. We'd play an afternoon gig someplace on a Saturday afternoon. We had a Friday night job. We had a Saturday night job at maybe somebody's prom, and then we'd go play the prom breakfast at 3 o'clock in the morning. It was tiring, but gosh, you're making money hand over fist. And about that time, we decided that people were paying what we thought was reasonable money. It was about the same money that we were getting, back in the old days. So we raised our price, and it didn't affect anything. Everybody just said, "Oh, okay, that's great." They paid it anyhow. We played. I mentioned Lebanon. There's another one up there in Jasper, Indiana, which we sort of exchanged with the Trendells and Carnations. They played up there a lot. We played in Indiana at Ewing Lane Elementary and the old, what was that, the Ramada Inn downtown? Churchill Inn? I can't remember the name of it was a hotel that had a nice ballroom. We played over at the Marriott. They had a nice ballroom, played there a lot. And then on the other side of the river, we had a Sunday night gig at the Shively Library, which wasn't very big, but people crammed in, and it was a job on Sunday nights, which we only played from like 8 to 11. We could get up and go to school or do whatever we had to do on Monday, and that was a nice supplement to the Friday and Saturday night. What else? Oh gosh, I can't forget the FOP Lodge. The FOP Lodge was brand new out there by McNeely Lake, and their first big gig, their first introduction to dance, they had the Sultans, the Monarchs, and the Trendells all performing. One on top of each, well, not one on top of each other, but in succession, one for a big rock and roll show. And it was just packed. And it was sort of like a battle of the bands. We were all young. Each one wanted to sound better than the other one. And it it was quite a night. And then from then on, we played out there on occasion for different groups of people. We played over at the Ramada Inn there on Hurstburn Lane.
So
Moving along.
When did you retire from the Monarchs, and what was that about, and what was life like after the Monarchs?
Well, I played with the Monarchs right up until New Year's Eve of 1986. That was my official. I like to tell people I played to 86, but I only played about an hour into 86. And I had already told him a couple of months before that that I had decided to retire from the band, primarily because I had other business interests. I had bought a radio station in Campbellsville, Kentucky. I was operating an advertising agency in Louisville. And I had two small children who were, in 1986, they would have been 4 and 5. And, we're getting on toward t-ball time and dance lessons and things like that. And, the band was just taking up too much. It wasn't that it took up too much time, it just took up too much prime time, because the only time I had was, with the family was Friday and Saturday nights, and the band was working all those nights, so they hardly ever got to see me. So I said, well, this is too much. Time to quit. Time to hang up my rock and roll shoes. So I told everybody I just got too fat to wear the tuxedos. But
you've returned several times since then to play with the Monarchs, right?
Every time I get invited, pretty much, yeah.
In closing, is there any message that you'd like to send to the Monarch fans concerning your time with the Monarchs?
Well, I consider myself a Monarch for life, I guess. My web address is GEO Monarch. So, and this is a story that how the Monarchs have affected my life after the band days. In 1995, the Courier-Journal did a story about me on their business page, and it was about me acquiring a radio station here in town. And the headline was, "Ex-Monarch becomes radio mogul," or something like that. I still get introduced at various functions that are far and wide, nothing to do with music or bands or anything else. And somebody will say, "This is George Owen. He used to be with the Monarchs." And they all go, "Oh, really? No kidding." I mean, it warms somebody up. It's like it hits a button on them that says, wow, either I'm cool, or they remember me, or remember the days that they used to come to Monarch dances. So many times there's guys that say, "Oh, I met my first wife at your dance."